we will start there. One thing she mentioned is that some of you are aware and have received emails from me. Two went out last week. One was a letter from our SSD superintendent. One was a follow-up letter the next day from myself. Mrs. Gifford is aware that some of you did not get those communications. And I would, sorry, I would request that folks, if at all possible, put themselves on mute so that all can hear. I should point out that Mr. Rich is recording the call. So once we're done and he's done the download and the technical, the recording will be available on the MRH website for who weren't able to be here or listen again. If you have not got my emails, I am typing my MRH email address into the chat now, although I need to spell it correctly. Okay. Please feel free to email me your current correct email address, and I'll add that to my distribution list. I apologize for those who may have been left off. I looked at MRH Power School and gleaned addresses from there, as well as front pages of IEPs, so I thought we had most of them, but apparently we've missed some. Feel free to email me and I'll get you on the distribution list. Okay, let's see here. I'm trying to see who all has been able to join us. We do have, I can see Mrs. Herndon Miller, who is one of our directors on our MRH Board of Education. So she's here and appreciate her being here. I believe I see Kat Norton, who is the assistant to Dr. Hall. She's on the call as well. And Dr. Hall may join us if her schedule allows. Mr. Estrada, our Director of Student Services for MRH, is hoping to join us, although he is driving cross country. So depending on where he is in rural America, he may or may not be able to join us. So just a little bit of background, because folks are probably kind of wondering what sorts of planning is underway, what things are happening kind of behind the scenes, if you will. And so I just want to share a few of those things that are going on. First and foremost, Dr. Hall is leading the whole effort to reopen schools in the fall. Her administrative team, principals, department heads, which includes me, we've been meeting on a weekly basis. Honestly, I think since spring break, we really haven't taken a break in that. So the administrative team has been working closely together for several months now. Additionally, of course, there are other meetings with principals and myself, various departments, planning for all the various facets and aspects of reopening. We have work groups that are meeting to address things like food service, the social emotional needs of our students, instructional aspects, those kinds of things. Additionally, on the SSD side of things, I've been meeting with fellow directors of special education around the county and with our executive leaders at SSD to plan accordingly, specific to the special ed side of things. One thing that you will see, and as most of you know, principals will be sharing additional plans and information August 3rd. I think you will see additional structure and additional scheduling aspects that will be put in place this fall as we reopen. And so that's a big conversation that I've been in on, other staff have been in on, so we can figure out how those service delivery options fit in with the scheduling plans for the opening of school. Did want to just point out, Dr. Hall has joined us, so welcome to her. Thank you. Another question that was asked, people were wondering, at a recent board meeting, Mrs. Meacham mentioned that there's training going on for MRH teachers regarding remote learning. And folks were wondering, are SSD staff included in those kinds of trainings as well as other MRH trainings? And the answer is yes. That training is just rolling out. It's starting with teacher leaders. But you should know, even in non-pandemic times, SSD staff are included in the great majority of MRH professional learning opportunities. Because we believe, and we meaning MRH administrators as well as myself, that special ed teachers need to know what's happening with curriculum and instruction in the general ed setting, so that we can be a better support for making sure our kids can access those opportunities. Another question that came up, and I promise I'll eventually get to the questions in the chat, but a question that came up was regarding distance learning plans. Some of you are familiar with those, some are not. So to begin, the driving document that still guides our delivery of special ed services is the IEP document. In a remote learning situation, we still look to the IEP as that which drives our work towards goals and services, but the distance learning plan specifically outlines how that will look in a remote learning environment, which is the environment that we're entering when we reopen school in about a month or so. All students will have a distance learning plan. Those learning plans will be primarily written by your child's case manager with input from other service providers if your child receives those services. So things like speech therapy, language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, ABA services, those get captured in that distance learning plan. So that will give you a better idea of how the services will be provided, given that we are not in a typical on-campus school situation. Part of the expectation for staff moving forward will be the offering of live synchronous lessons with students. Now, I have to say, I've also heard from, so many people really want that live interaction. Certainly teachers thrive on that interaction with their students. Hopefully students thrive on that as well. We've also heard, though, from a few families that live sessions don't work as well for their particular child. We can try to work with you in terms of coming up with an approach that will meet your child's needs. But again, there will be an expectation that those live sessions will be offered and provided. Excuse me. In the closure in the spring, we used Google Meet. This fall, we will be using primarily Zoom, which is we found to be a more reliable platform from a technical standpoint. And some of the security and safety aspects of Zoom that were not satisfactory in the spring to MRH have been resolved by the Zoom company. So that will be a nice option for us moving forward. Question was asked about paras being included in the distance learning plan. They won't be in the distance learning plan per se, but they may be involved in supporting learning in various ways. They may be involved in creating materials. They may be involved in actual live online sessions. There can be a number of ways that paras could be involved. If preschool is closed, so for our youngest learners, they would also have a virtual distance learning opportunity as well. See, another question that had come up was, when do teachers come back? And when will we expect to hear from our teachers and our case managers? SSD teachers return August 17. MRH teachers return August 19. So it will be a bit before you would start hearing directly from staff. You know, they are contracted to return on those dates. That being said, you know, that doesn't mean they're going to come back cold on the 17th and have no idea what's happening. I have a staff meeting tomorrow for special ed staff who are available and can join. So we are moving forward with planning. Someone asked about the possibility of porch visits. That was mentioned in the last board meeting as a nice way for teachers and students to connect and to maintain that, that relationship. That is a possibility. Obviously, we'd have to put guidelines around it for social distancing and those kinds of things. A follow-up question was, could that be a way to deliver instruction? And that probably would not be an appropriate way to actually deliver special ed instruction. But it does have some value for keeping that personal connection going. And really, as we all know, it's the personal connection and it's the social interaction that really brings education alive. So we're trying to think of ways that we can make that happen. Teacher level staff will have office hours. So there'll be times that they'll be available to reach out. Of course, they will have a teaching load as well. And you'll have information about when that's happening, especially and specifically for your child or children. So those are some of the main questions that I received from Mrs. Gifford. So please give me a second here to get into the chat. Okay. Okay, so there is a question about, will this particular meeting cover information about 504 plans? That will depend largely on whether Mr. Estrada can join us, because 504 plans are, while in some aspects similar, are managed and written from a MRH Gen Ed side of things. So that's not something that I directly have responsibility for, and I'm hesitant to speak on Vince's behalf.
Yeah, and can I interject quickly? I do apologize profusely for not being able to address that question at this point in time. Mr. Estrada is traveling across the country right now. He's moving his child across the country, helping out. So he is heading back right now. He was trying to do it through the phone, but I guess he's unable to do it. So I'm so sorry, but we can't get your answer. Like, we'll have that, Ben, and we can follow up, make sure people know what is going to happen with that. So they'll have the details, okay? Because we're very happy to do that. It's just, unfortunately, he's not here, and we don't want to misinform you. So that's just the reason why.
Thank you.
Mhm.
There's a question about a particular staff member who retired and whether there's a replacement for her. That was Missy Barger at the high school level. And her replacement has been hired. His name is Aaron Wynn. He's an experienced teacher who's been with SSD for a number of years. So we look forward to working with him. That actually, if I can take a brief aside, there was a question, I believe last time, that asked about will additional staff be hired, paras, et cetera. At this point, we're not hiring additional staff. That being said, just because of the increase in the student population of MRH, over the last 4 years, we have added 5 teacher positions in addition to some other positions. So I do feel like staffing-wise, we're in a good position at this point. Question specifically about use of Zoom. Do I mean MRH or just SSD? And both. Both MRH teachers and SSD teachers will be able to use Zoom moving forward, which is, everybody's happy. You saw Dr. Hall right there. If you could see her, she had 2 thumbs up and 2 thumbs up from me as well. Very pleased about that, that change. There's a question about any thought having been given to scheduling in-person services on campus. So that will depend a little bit on the status of the closure of MRH buildings. If a family were to choose an all virtual format, which is an option separate from the 3-tier MRH plan, and if we were, say, in a blended environment where some students were on campus, it would be possible to schedule some in-person services, even if you had selected the full virtual option. I will need to get more information, and we'll probably have to have some more conversations with Dr. Hall and other district leaders about whether or not it would be a possibility to have any students on campus. That was briefly brought up at the board meeting, and I think there were, there probably will be some conversations about whether or not that would be an option or not. This may be a question that Dr. Hall perhaps could chime in on. Does the district have Chromebooks for preschool families who will receive virtual services? Is that known yet?
So we're in the developing stages with locating virtual learning for that particular age group. And then also there's a work session for the board tomorrow evening to specifically talk about preschool in general. So both of those things in tandem are going to be discussed. Since this is a fee-based program, there's some, is a different beast in a, so to speak, in terms of planning and everything. And so the board needs to discuss re-entry for preschool and how they're going to move forward with that. So one step at a time. Will preschool be open? How will we operate? We have been doing some work from the instructional side to identify some online learning, and we have been able to identify a program, but we're still trying to figure out, and we need to know from the board if we're gonna actually be open, and if we are open, how do we function? So to be continued. And again, the work session, that's one of the items that the board's going to discuss tomorrow night at 6:30. So you can tune in.
There's a question regarding when live sessions would be offered. And at this point, we are planning for those to be during regular school hours. Okay, so there is a question about possible compensatory services because, you know, in a remote learning environment, it really isn't developmentally appropriate to have students sitting at a computer for 7 hours a day. So we have to think in terms of, you know, providing access. So in terms of compensatory services, that would be on a case-by-case or individual basis, that could be considered, and that conversation could start with touching base with me or your child's case manager. So, all right. So yeah, you know, there's a follow-up question with that around, you know, trying to get kids caught up as much as possible. And so those would be, I would say those would be individual type conversations that we could have. So there's a question about when we'll find out about the plan for our specific child or your specific child. That will come through the distance learning plan. And I should say, case managers will be reaching out to you all, you know, once they're back at work. Some of you who have a child who's moving to a new school or a new loop, you may be meeting your child's case manager through a home visit as well, because some of our case managers will be involved on those home visits. So you would be finding out the plan for your specific child close to the start of school, quite honestly, because there are, you know, some scheduling factors that will have to be addressed, just honestly quite like they are when we're in person. Because as I kind of alluded to towards the beginning, there will be a little more structure to the day coming out from principals that will impact scheduling. You know, because we've studied what we did in the spring, studied parent feedback, and we're trying to create a much more robust learning opportunity for all of our students. So that will play into the scheduling of services. There's a question, aren't we all virtual as of now? Yes, we are. So I think, I'm not sure if a comment I made may have led to some confusion. So MRH has developed, each school has a three-tiered plan, depending on that takes into consideration the amount of community viral spread in our area. And because of the current spread, right now, the board voted last Thursday evening that everyone would be in a virtual format. There is going to be, and Dr. Hall, correct me if I'm misspeaking, there is going to be another option, which would be a full virtual option, whereby parents would say, I don't want my child to be back on campus this first semester. I want to for sure have them home learning virtually, because in the MRH plan, if the spread of the virus in the community were to go down, and obviously we all hope that it will, we could transition into a different tier of the planning, and students might be back on campus. So there will be an option for families to say, even if the virus spread is going down, we're not comfortable for our family having our child go back. So there are two ways that students could be in a virtual environment, if you will. So there's a question about, will virtual planning be a little more efficient now? Yeah, you know, we are providing, and well, we will be providing professional learning for our staff about virtual learning, especially K-6. Staff will be more familiar with the It's Learning platform, which is the MRH online learning management platform. So that will be better. In It's Learning, you know, you can, if a student submits work, the instructor can provide feedback, mark it complete, and we can avoid, you know, paper and that kind of thing if that doesn't work for you as well. Okay. So there's a question about what changes are being made to make virtual learning more effective. I think to begin with, the training that Mrs. Meacham has developed and that SSD is developing takes into consideration what is known already about effective virtual learning. And many of the components are similar to good instruction in the classroom, that being, you know, things like clearly stated learning objectives, so the student knows what you want them to learn, modeling, feedback. But right now we have the opportunity to think more clearly, deeply, carefully about how that translates into the virtual environment. You know, last spring, you know, like spring break hit, and all of a sudden we were closed, and we pivoted and ran with it. This time we have a better opportunity to be more planful. There's a follow-up question about accommodations to students using It's Learning. We are actually looking at and trying to figure out what possible assistive technology applications would be compatible with that. Trying to figure out, you know, if we can provide text-to-speech, speech-to-text, word prediction, those kinds of features that would make the online learning platform much more accessible. Let's see. Here's a question, and Dr. Hall, I would need your input on this. Is there a date by which parents will need to select which path they want for their child?
Yeah, that is a great question. So meeting with Roxana Meacham, the assistant superintendent, this morning, we decided probably the best way to begin the explanation of the virtual learning, because there's two pathways. Actually, technically, there's three. And now that we're in tier 3, we really want to clarify the different pathways and how that's going to work. So the best way in trying to initiate the explanation is through more of a webinar, a recorded explanation, and then to follow up on the buildings, which one you would prefer. Because originally thinking that blended in tier 2 would be some face-to-face and some It's Learning. Now that it's all tier 3, it's all virtual with It's Learning. However, we do have something that is a parallel MRH student choice that you could stay in temporarily or the whole year if you weren't comfortable with It's Learning, and that's Schools PLP. And that is available, and you can learn more about that with her when she produces this webinar. Now, parents have conflated the difference between the second choice and the third one when people talk about homeschooling their child, which of course that's always a choice, but when you homeschool, you are no longer enrolled in MRH. So you're on your own, but we do have MOCAP, which originally we were talking about that for a second choice, but now we've put that over to that 1/3 choice here. And there would not, let me be clear, any engagement with MRH staff in that particular choice. But in the middle, when I was saying schools, PLP, if you wanted to do it for a semester or if you wanted to do it for the year, you would engage in some capacity with an MRH teacher. And of course, like we did in fourth quarter, you did engage with a teacher for its learning. So I want you to remember there's 3 choices, but really that MOCAP homeschooling piece is really outside of like the training and all these things that you all have been talking about. But with the 2, she's really going to focus on its learning and then also schools PLP. Now there's a question down at the bottom from Dana. I do want to say, yes, we are going to do some training for parents with its learning and then also schools PLP. It's very important. That was a lot of the feedback that we received from our survey back in June. And thank you so much for those of you that responded, because it really helped us with our planning moving forward. And so we're trying to build that into all the training, not only for staff, but we also want to have time for parents. So to go back, my goal is to have this out, this webinar, this produced explanation of what the different pathways are by the end of this week. We need to meet with our principals tomorrow. Well, she's meeting with them today and I'm meeting with them tomorrow to get really clear on their next steps too. But really, I want something so it could be played and shared quite a bit, something succinct that she's going to produce, because there are choices and I want folks to really clearly understand what those 3 different choices are so it's a good fit for your child. Thanks, Ben.
Sure, thank you. There is a question essentially regarding if there's disagreement about the distance learning plan or its adequacy. If you have concerns about that, I would ask that you reach out to me and the case manager, and we would try to work through that. Let's see. There's a question about use of its learning at the various grade levels. Maybe I misspoke. Its learning will be used K through 12 for all MRH students. And yes, that was Dr. Hall already addressed Mrs. Glor's question a little bit, but clearly one thing we learned from the spring was that we need to help parents better understand how to use and access its learning. Let's see. Okay. So I think the question here is around consistency of scheduling services. You know, especially as it relates to you all as parents planning your schedules and your ability and making sure your students are online and ready to go. And so, yeah, we will do our absolute best to provide consistent scheduling of services, you know, so that you're not dealing with, you know, various lessons at random times. Because we obviously, you know, we understand that this whole virtual learning piece itself can be challenging for many folks who are still working or who have other obligations. So we'll do our best to make sure that you know in advance and that we can be as consistent as possible with when those services are being provided. There's a question about conversations happening? What conversations are happening regarding social emotional health? And will the school be creating virtual social pods for our kids? Megan Boyer at the elementary school leads our social emotional learning component. And she, I believe, is slated to share that with us in the next, maybe tomorrow. I can't remember. So I can't speak to the specifics of that outside of specific goals and services in a child's IEP that might be addressing social needs. It's interesting that this has brought up the idea of virtual social pods for our kids. I was thinking about that over the weekend and talking with my wife about, hey, maybe we could create some opportunities for kids to play games online with peers that are created, curated, what have you, by a staff member. So that's an idea that definitely has merit, because one thing we're seeing is kids are not experiencing the same types of social interactions in this pandemic environment as they do normally. So I would welcome ideas on how that could look. Let's see. There's a question about the meeting regarding the 3 virtual options, and I think Dr. Hall mentioned he hopes that the webinar at least will be out by the end of the week. Oh, okay. Sorry. Now I read, you can ignore that question. Those are the questions that I see at the moment. We do have some more time. Oh, here we go. So there is a question about catching kids up when this is all over. Honestly, I don't know yet what that might look like, or whether there might be additional summer opportunities, but that's something that we could keep in mind, and I would need to work with SSD leadership as well as MRE leadership on what might be possible. Okay. Here's a kudos to one of our teachers last spring who did some of the social emotional pods. Question about how social skills will be evaluated if we select the virtual option. That will depend on how the goals are written. If we have goals that are specific to, let's say, given a certain social scenario, a student would, identify the problem and come up with a possible solution. That could be fairly easily done in a virtual environment. If the goal is written for, interacting over or through a game experience or a free choice time, we might have to talk about how that goal would be evaluated because of the confines of the remote learning situation. Okay, sorry, I have to scroll back up. So one parent is concerned about making sure kids complete their work appropriately and getting good feedback from teachers. And so most definitely the feedback will be important. So our staff will be trying to provide valuable feedback to students as well as keeping you apprised. And if you ever are feeling like you don't have enough information, I encourage you to reach out to the case manager or that particular service provider, and they can certainly talk with you more about how your child is performing. Yeah, the comment is, my older kid did try to get away with not doing all of his work. And kids will do that. one aspect of the It's Learning platform, and this may be a good part to include in parent training, is an ability to see a dashboard of assignments that have been completed or not. So that may be a way that as parents become more familiar with the It's Learning platform, you all will have a way to see for sure if students are completing the work that's been assigned to them. Okay. Here's someone.
Something real quick, Ben. Are you talking about this most recent comment in the chat box, I think, about assignments and time? So one thought also with the planning and the training that the teachers are receiving right now kind of plays into this. Because as some of you said earlier in this chat conversation, we had to put content into It's Learning like in 2 days or a few more days. You know, it was not the most efficient or most effective. I mean, grateful our teachers made things happen, but we know it could be better. So with what we're doing right now with training and thinking about a virtual learning environment, it's not just taking what we had going on in the classroom and putting it into It's Learning. We're really thinking differently about the instruction in terms in a virtual world, like starting from the beginning. So the flow, the ebb and flow, I would expect the expectation would be different in how we're presenting the content and how the teachers are going to engage. So the expectation is to improve with your effectiveness when working with the students and not just taking what exactly you were doing in the class, but really modifying it, same content in terms of what is appropriate for the IEP and what's appropriate for that grade level, but it's the delivery. The platform is now all going to be virtual. The ebb and flow, the frequency of the work needs to be taken into account because of this virtual environment. So that's part of the training that we're going through right now. In addition to what Ben is sharing and how to stay on top, you know, you could see with the dashboard, that's part of the training, the things that we want to point out. But I also want to step back a little bit and say that that's what we're working on. We just can't just put it in there and think it's going to, you know, cross our fingers it's going to work. That's on us and the training and learning more about how to engage virtually, especially 100% virtually with students now.
So here's a question, just want clarification. Right now, there is no choice because MRH has decided that the entire K-12 is only all virtual learning, which means there is no choice. Is that correct? In a way, yes, because we're starting in tier 3, which is a virtual learning tier. The choice becomes if you want to stay with the MRH experience, if the virus in the community decreases, by choosing kind of the main MRH path, you would be opening yourself up to, if schools reopen because the health situation changes, then your child would have an opportunity to return to some level of on-campus in-class learning. But you're right, in this very moment at the start of school, students in MRH would be starting in a virtual format.
The choice is, I don't want to confuse things, Ben, it's me. The
Sure.
choice is your platform. Yes, it's 100%, but how do you receive the information? Who are you engaging with? And so it's exactly everything that Ben said. It's Learning is there. We're going to be in It's Learning right now. And then when community spread decreases, excuse me, there will be a blend of face-to-face and It's Learning. But if your family chooses to stay virtual, excuse me, and you want your child to have, some engagement with an MRH teacher, then that's that second choice that I was talking about before. So it's learning platforms, because we want people, if they choose to stay home, either for a short period of time or for the whole year, all virtual, we have a choice for you. So it's the tier, we're in tier 3. It is virtual, but how you choose to have your child engage with the curriculum, you do have a choice with.
And I should point out, if a family selects that separate virtual option, if you will, and then subsequently MRH schools reopen, I should point out, because this may factor into families' decisions, that there is a possibility that if MRH is open for some on-campus learning, even if you've chosen that separate virtual format, we would potentially be in a position to have students come on campus, students who were in that separate virtual format, come on campus, especially for some of their related services, like speech therapy, language therapy, OT, PT. So that would be an option, and it may be something that folks would want to consider as you watch the webinar and make a choice that's right for your family. So there's a question of, oh, sorry, I think I almost missed one. There was some concern about extended time last spring for assignments, tests, etc. At least one incident of students being penalized for late assignments. And essentially what we need to do, if a student has extended time as an accommodation in his or her IEP, we need to make sure that that accommodation is honored, that it's communicated effectively to all the teachers of that child, and that that accommodation is honored. So if that were not to be the case, I would hope you would communicate with your child's case manager or with me, so we can address the issue promptly. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing. So there's a question about if you chose the second platform, you wouldn't be engaging in classroom pods anymore. I would guess in terms of like a gen ed classroom type situation, no, because that would be a separate path that you would be on. I'm not sure that that has been decided necessarily. Karen's maybe disagreeing.
No. No, I wouldn't say definitively that that is the case. The impression that I have received from Roxana Meacham, there's more engagement still for MRH teachers with students who choose the second choice. And it's part of the reason why it's favored, because that family is not alone. They still are connected to the teacher and also the staff in some capacity. I cannot specifically speak to, classroom pods or whatnot, but the idea is still to keep the student engaged.
There's a question about for students who need extra support to access the curriculum, is it possible to get homebound instruction to help them keep up with the MRH syllabus? Homebound is actually a placement. So when we think about IEP services, services are provided in varying degrees in the gen ed setting, or in public separate school, a private separate school, or a homebound situation. So we really would not be able to mix essentially a gen ed environment with a homebound environment. But again, if folks are concerned about their child and support for their child, let's have a conversation about that. Mrs. Gifford has put into the chat a link to the Facebook parent group. It's specifically for parents of students who receive special ed services. So I would encourage you to check the chat and join that group if it's of interest to you. One thing that may be helpful as we move forward is making those connections among parents, so you're not feeling like you're on your own. Maybe there would be some opportunities for small groups of parents at different grade levels or schools to communicate and support each other. Of course, I would leave that up to Kim and the Facebook parent group, but that might be something that would be of benefit to folks. And here's a shout out to Kim, a great job for getting the Parent Advisory Council going.
Yeah, if I could just say real quick, my whole point of starting the group was to get parents together. I'm hoping that we can share resources and compare stories and help each other. I don't know what it's going to become. Joanna and I actually had this idea together, and it's something that we had hoped to start in the spring, but things happened that made it not possible for us to get together in person. So we're trying to get together online as a way to help each other, and we'll see what that means, what we need, what we can do to bridge the gap between us and the community, us and schools, between each other. So that's my hope. So help us join together and make a difference in our world.
Mrs. Gifford, there was a request. There's a person who's unable to open the chat with their current computer at work. If you could post the link to the Facebook parent group on other MRH parent Facebook platforms, just so they can access that. So here's a question, comment and question supporting the decision to go virtual. The question is, what discussion and with whom can parents have about if their child should even be going to the next grade level? This parent feels their child really isn't currently where they should be, especially with the online learning. Could there be a discussion to hold the child back, or how to evaluate whether that should happen? I would say reaching out to your child's school principal, as well as myself, to have that dialogue happen. Promotion is, from grade to grade, is in the hands of the school principal, but certainly we could have a conversation about that if that was something that wanted to be explored. I am not seeing any more items in the chat at the moment. There were, since there aren't any other, and we have just a couple more minutes, there were some questions that Mrs. Gifford had shared to me, which were more germane to if we were in session. One of them was around special transportation through SSD. Actually, that had come up in the last meeting a couple weeks ago. There was a question about cleaning of buses. So I'll just point out that SSD does have a process to sanitize buses if your child receives special transportation. Students with a temperature would not be allowed to ride the bus. In between routes, There'd be sanitizing of various surfaces, handrail, front and back of seats, windows, window handles, seat belts, walls, steering wheel, door opener, those kinds of things. So essentially the point here is that SSD does have a plan to sanitize buses between routes. There would be, as usual, quite honestly, a small number of students on the bus that would support social distancing during the bus ride. Staff, should we be in session, will be provided with PPE in terms of masks, face shields, gloves, and of course, staff members who would be supporting students with significant needs around toileting, feeding. We would make sure that those folks had the appropriate PPE to try to keep everybody safe. All right. I am not seeing any more questions. And I think we are at 12:58. So I think, Dr. Hall, do you have anything else you want to add before we end the call?
Thank you to everyone. I'm so grateful. I see thank you from folks here, but I'm thankful for you. I'm glad that you're here on this call and everyone's asking questions, and we're here for you, and we're going to do our very best to keep everyone safe and give our children a good education. I understand my baby's a senior this year, so we're all in this together. I get it. So we want to keep the communication loop tight. And we are here to answer any questions and to respond to your feedback. It is very appreciative. The group is very appreciative, leadership and teachers, everyone, when we can continuously talk to each other so we can refine what we're doing. So I appreciate you all so much. Thank you. So we're scheduled for another meeting August 8th.
August 10th, 2 weeks. 2 weeks
so
from
that'll be good, because the big next release would be August 3rd coming from the buildings, and so that's more specific information, and we'll be here for you to answer further questions. So more to come. And then also to reiterate that webinar, that recorded information about the 3 virtual platforms. I got on the phone with Roxana Meacham to make sure, like, all right, what's the date? We need this information out. And she said by the end of the week. So we're double checking with that external source that I was referring to, the virtual platform. There were some unknowns. We want to double check, make sure everything is lined up the way that we want it to. And then we're going to release this information so you all can review it. So again, there's more to come.
All right. Thank you so much. I would reiterate what Dr. Hall said. We'd really appreciate your involvement and your engagement today. Please feel free to continue to reach out to me, and I will be glad to either communicate via email, phone, what have you, so that we can try to address your questions, concerns, and plan for a great year for each of our students. All right. Thank you so much.